Okay, right then. So, yes, thank you. As I say, I'm Jonathan Wise. I'm co-founder at Purpose Disruptors, and thank you for spending the next hour or so with us. The session that we're going to do is obviously launching. It's the global launch of our new report entitled "Beyond the Chaos, Ahead of the Curve." And the next hour or so, we're going to be talking, do three things. Part one is going to be a couple of presentations. So I'm just going to introduce purpose disruptors, talk a little bit about the report, introduce the idea of advertised emissions and service emissions, and importantly, the importance of climate risk, which is the kind of main framing for the report that we've created. Then the second part of the presentation is going to be Alexis McGibbon, who's the head of stakeholder engagement at Oxford Net Zero, and she's going to talk a little bit more broadly about why this service emissions and climate risk is important as a leadership opportunity across the entire kind of professional services sector. Part two is going to be a panel. So we're going to hear from three people who feature in the report. So Lucy Usher from Oliver, Jenny Mossman from Amplify, and Paul Elliott from Ubiquity. More on them later. And then part three is going to be a Q&A. So throughout the session, if you have any questions, well, I'll let Amy do this. Amy, do you want to just talk about how the Q&A is going to work?
For sure. So I am going to drop a link in the chat now. So if you have any questions over the course of this webinar, please do pop your questions in this document. And then Nadine and I, who are sort of working behind the scenes at PD, will be grouping these into questions that we'll pose back to any people that you've heard speak today. So Jonathan, Alexis, the panel. So throw your questions in there. And we will come back to those in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you. So yeah, in the next hour, hopefully you'll get a clear understanding of why advertised emissions and service emissions are important, know why climate risk is a compelling rationale for more bold climate action, and hear from practitioners about how they've turned theory into practice. So we hope that this is helpful and energizing and satisfies the curiosity of the people here. So let's go. So Purpose Disruptors, for those that you don't know, we are a small organization with a big ambition. We're a non-profit, and our vision is quite bold. It's the idea that there's a future in which advertising works in harmony with the natural world. So advertising moves primarily from extraction, from regeneration, from negligence to responsibility, from careless to conscious consumption. And myself and two co-founders, Lisa Merrick Lawless and Rob McFall, all of whom are on the call, and we will have deep history of working in the industry as insiders. And our four areas of work. So Lisa leads on creativity, top left, so creating a desire for a new good life. You may well have seen the fantastic Agency for Nature work that's kind of manifest through that channel. Education that Rob leads, Change the Brief Alliance. So lots of the industry have had the opportunity to go through that. Learning experience measurement, which we're going to be leading on today, which is myself, Nadine and Omon, advertised emissions. And then we all work on community. Kind of the heart of our work is just, the community and encouraging people to kind of come together and spend time collaborating, and ideally also kind of some nature consciousness, kind of connecting to nature, which has become a more dominant feature of our gatherings in recent months. And I think what's interesting is that we span not just within the advertising industry, but outside of that as well. So brands and platforms, lots of them are engaging with our work. Culture and nature, obviously led through our Agency for Nature work. So some really fascinating people coming towards us. And then more importantly, sorry, not more importantly, but equally, academia and government. So obviously Oxford Net Zero, and Oxford University, represented by Alexis on the call, and also University of Portsmouth, again, who've been working with us on advertised emissions. And I think a question that we keep coming back to that's really at the heart of our work is this. So how do we move the advertising industry away from driving unsustainable consumption towards creating work that enables people to live with planetary boundaries? And you can see here part of our Agency for Nature work on the right-hand side, and Good Life work from Ireland, Less Buying, More Being is a representation of that. But obviously, advertised emissions and service emissions is a key plank to help us invite and ask that question as well. And because we believe that in order for us as a society to stay within planetary boundaries, the industry needs to widen the scope of considering the climate impact that it has. So at the moment, the predominant focus of the industry is thinking about the internal impact. So let's get our house in order. Let's think about the carbon impact of our offices, our business travel, production, media decarbonisation. But clearly, the industry is in the business of affecting influence and desire in society as a whole. So we believe that in order for us to stay, as I say, in planetary boundaries, we need to be considering that external influence, that $1 trillion of ad spend that is deployed in shaping and embedding narratives that define culture and values in our society. And if we can deploy our skills to help shift that amount of money and that amount of influence, then it will be amazing to help us all live within planetary boundaries. So our kind of contribution to that is advertised as purpose disruptors with the kind of origination of the idea of advertised emissions, because what gets measured is what gets done, and we believe this to kind of be the missing measure for the industry. So advertised emissions, simple calculation, advertising spend times by the return on investment of that advertising times by the carbon footprint of those things that you're selling. And our definition, therefore, is they're the greenhouse gas emissions that result from the uplift in sales generated by advertising. So advertising's role is to drive incremental sales. So what's the carbon footprint associated with the increase in sales of that? And when we launched our first report in 2021, sorry, we calculated for 2019 that the advertising emissions for the UK as a whole was 186 million tons, which means that advertising was adding around 28% to the carbon footprint of every single person in the country. That's in the UK. So again, advertising has a huge influence in terms of our society, and to be able to move that towards helping us live within planetary boundaries would be absolutely fantastic. Concurrently, alongside this work, we were invited to join Alexis and the team at Oxford Net Zero and Race to Zero to develop what became the service to missions work that we're going to talk about. So this was not just at the advertising companies, but all professional services. So imagine not just WP and Dentsu and JC2Co, but also what if McKinsey, Accentures, the Linklaters, the EYs, the Arabs of the world also thought about deploying their skills to help make a more sustainable future, because they're force multipliers. The work they do on clients has a massive impact in the way that society and businesses operate in the world. So service emissions are defined as the greenhouse gas emissions arising from or impacted by the client activities that were informed or enabled by the advice or services of that service provider. So if you're McKinsey and you're helping, I don't know, BP work on that, securing that contract for the oil well, then that is work advice that's has a real world impact. And so I think the way that you can think about it then is service emissions widens the scope to enable all professional service providers to take what we call like a whole company approach with the client portfolio at its core. So it embeds climate considerations in all business processes, but perhaps most importantly, enables or facilitates the requirement for those companies across the professional service landscape to consider the kind of work they do for the kind of clients they do based on the services they offer and the advice they give. So it goes from a small scope of operational to a much larger, as I say, all company approach. So just to kind of clarify, service to missions is effectively the framework that lays the foundation for change across all professional service providers, and advertised emissions is kind of like the methodology to help quantify and ideally reduce the impact of companies in the advertising sector. And as Lex has been leading, there's similar work now happening within management consulting and legal, and we're hoping that other professional service providers sectors will also join. And then Alex will sort of talk more about the Service Emissions Hub later. So back to our work, as I say, we launched at COP 26 in Glasgow, the first report. Nadine went to Sharm el Sheikh for the following COP in 2022. We then linked with the service emissions work by launching our report last year, which featured how advertised emissions helps and the work helps drive service emissions. and then leads us to the report that we are here today to talk about. And so back to the question I started at the beginning, how do we move the advertising industry away from driving unsustainable consumption to creating work that enables people to live within planetary boundaries? I think what's really interesting about this report, and we got so much advice from our advertising emissions working group, members of whom were on the panel, and other sources, that actually the lens of climate risk is something that can really drive the agenda forward, because it can take it out of the sustainability teams and put it into the boardroom. And so that's kind of like the kind of, we feel, one of the key contributions that this report can offer the industry as a whole. So what do we mean by climate risks? So in the report, you'll see that we kind of categorize them in 5 different ways. So physical risks, so these are kind of direct operational risks. The recent Dentsu climate-related disclosure report puts these really eloquently. So what are the climate impacts on the offices in terms of energy supply and energy costs, or staff working conditions, or even their ability to travel to work? Transition risks, so this is lack of preparedness for regulatory changes. So, for example, as kind of governments and regulators want to move us to a low carbon society. So have you considered increases in carbon pricing, advertising restrictions, which of course are happening globally, enhanced reporting requirements, for example, within the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and Science-Based Targets Initiative? Again, Alexis is going to pick up this shortly. Thirdly, strategic risks. If you haven't been taking this lens of climate on your organization and you haven't integrated it into your corporate strategy, you may be unable to see and respond to emerging opportunities like shifts to the circular economy. Reputational risks, and this is kind of becoming more and more present, increasing noise and expectation around companies, particularly divesting talent away from fossil fuels. So, for example, again, covered in the report, the Global Climate and Health Alliance, which is 75 organizations representing over 12 million health professionals, are committed to saying no to working with any advertising or any PR company that works with fossil fuels. So if you work with fossil fuels, there's a reputational and business risk actually in terms of being able to attract other clients. And finally, liability risks, the risks of litigation for greenwashing and working with high carbon companies is also important. You're starting to see this within other professional service professions such as McKinsey. Alexis is going to talk about this, but it doesn't take a genius to realize this is also going to filter through towards advertising companies as well. So those are kind of like the 5 risks, but we've also identified that there's a further risk that is unique to advertising. It carries a unique exposure, and we've called this the demand depletion cycle. So on the left-hand side, we have the advertising agencies and their clients depend on the natural systems to enable the success of their organizations. So the raw materials to make the products, the open shipping lanes to transport those materials around, or stable energy supplies to run those factories. But that demand that they're creating, in fact, influences and accelerates the depletion and disruption of those systems. So, and I'll just give an example right now. So, for example, as you're seeing around the world, and these are kind of headlines from the last couple of weeks, the climate shocks are already wreaking havoc over food supplies, whether that's sugar, cotton, wine, chocolate, coffee. These are in the headlines all the time. There's a huge piece in the FT at the weekend actually about beef and how rising beef prices were affecting President Trump's difficulties in keeping the MAGA supporters happy because it's affecting cost of living. So advertising, what's the relationship between advertising and, for example, the shocks on the food system? And this is what we see as the kind of the depletion and demand cycle. Because if there's more advertising for high carbon products, for food, for fast fashion, for technology, that leads to more consumption, obviously. That more consumption, therefore, leads to increased carbon emissions. As I stated, the advertised emissions number goes up, and also decreases biodiversity, because if you need more burgers for McDonald's that you're selling through advertising, there's going to be less rainforest in order to supply that. That therefore means, because of the climate impacts on weather systems, etc., there's less crops. and therefore there's less raw materials because there's less yield from those crops. That therefore will drive up commodity prices and reduce export on those raw materials. That therefore means there's less products, and that of course means there's going to be less advertising, because if you haven't got many products to sell, you're not going to need any advertising to sell it, because supply and demand will mean that you'll sell it anyway without needing to kind of define your competitive difference. So for example, if you were working in coffee, needing coffee, Nestle, if you needed cocoa, Cadbury's, if you needed corn for cornflakes, if you needed potatoes for Walker's Crisp from PepsiCo, if you needed sugarcane for Coca-Cola, if you needed paper or wood for packaging for P&G, or palm oil for Unilever products, those are all raw materials. If they become in short supply, which they will, then that has a negative impact on the ability for advertising. And so I guess the key takeout is this, that climate therefore is a material business risk. When you think the disruptions will affect your client, when you think the disruptions that I've just talked about will affect your clients, it's less important than acknowledging that you need to recognize and discuss this now. This will strengthen your long-term resilience and success. The businesses that thrive will be those that understand their client portfolio, and because future success depend on spotlighting these emerging risks across categories, and it's just business sense to kind of like do proactive portfolio management around this. And thirdly, and most importantly, service emissions provides the framework for discussions. We believe it allows you to engage the board and clients with confidence. It provides the tools, language, and framing to help start important conversations, as we'll come on to in a moment. And Laura Clark, who gratefully added to our paper as well, she says the choice is clear: defend the old economy or help design a new one. Those that act with foresight will not just survive, they will thrive, because of course where there's risk, there's also opportunity. So just to clarify and to finish, so we hope that you get a chance to read the report in its fullness. We just hope that it helps you to, as you say here, understand the relationship between advertising and the climate crisis, gain a view in more detail I've been able to give you in this whistle-stop tour of the range of risks that you could be facing, provide you with a roadmap, gain insight from leaders on how they're approaching that. We'll hear from three of them in a minute, and then deep dives on two of those, how they're doing it with detail. And we've been so grateful that this report has also been enhanced by the work and the contributions of ClientEarth, as I've said, University of Portsmouth, Creators for Climate, and of course, Oxford Net Zero. And so with that, I'll pass to Alexis. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jonathan. And it's great to see people in the chat responding to this so well. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here. And hopefully you have the opportunity to have some lunch before or after this. But I'm calling in from Oxford Net Zero, which is a research group based at the University of Oxford. And I head up a team there that basically acts as the bridge between academia and practitioners. So we really sit at the intersection of academic research and the implementation of the advice or the guidance that comes out of that academic research. So next chart, please. So Jonathan has already touched on serviced emissions, but this really comes from a very well-established precedent, first starting with the idea of financed emissions. So really what the responsibility is of the financiers who are enabling fossil fuel extraction or high carbon products. Previously, there was an understanding within carbon accounting that really you could only account for the physical widgets that you were producing. But as we understood kind of the greater scope of responsibility, we understood that those financing the production of high carbon emissions were also responsible. And from that precedent came the work of purpose disruptors and the advertised emissions framework. And then the serviced emissions framework, as Jonathan already noted, really just builds on that idea and expands it to more professional services firms, notably to lawyers and consultants who are really already starting to think about this on the implementation side. So as Jonathan mentioned, service emissions are really looking beyond the very narrow operational lens that we have really focused on to date with professional services providers. So really looking just at business travel or energy use in the office, and instead really expands that to understanding the impact of our advice and the influence on our clients. And so this could include, for example, lawyers advising on project financing for coal expansion, or designing, for example, an ad campaign for Exxon or BP. And so next slide, please. Thanks. So we talk in this report about this surround sound of pressure, and I really want to, the takeaway for this to be there's a surround sound of pressure, but that's really energy and momentum towards this cause. So we've seen a growing amount of scrutiny and interest on professional services, starting, for example, with and we focus in this report on the advertising industry. So some other examples from across the professional services landscape are McKinsey was a couple of years ago named as a co-defendant in a suit against ExxonMobil for heat damages in Multnomah County in Oregon. And McKinsey has been in this situation before. So McKinsey had to settle for about $600 million for their role in advising Purdue Pharma during the opioid crisis. And we're sort of seeing a similar precedent there being utilized when basically taking this lawsuit against ExxonMobil for heat damages and naming not only ExxonMobil, but their advisors, McKinsey, during that time. We saw WPP receive a complaint under the OECD earlier this year in February, which was basically that the work that WPP is doing on behalf of high carbon clients basically puts them in violation of OECD principles on human rights and environmental protections. And finally, and I saw someone mention this in the chat, which made me excited, is that the International Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the world, clarified existing obligations of states under international law when it comes to acting on climate. So for those who are maybe unfamiliar with the ICJ advisory opinion that came out this summer, it's not something new. It is a clarification of what states already need to do under their existing international obligations. And basically what it said very transparently is that acting on climate is not a political preference. It is an obligation under international law. And therefore, it is a possibility that states will be litigated against for failing to act on climate. So this is kind of part of the surround sound, but also the momentum and energy, and really looking at this expanded scope of accountability within this landscape. So not just looking at traditional actors, but really looking at the enabling forces. And something that's important about that ICJ advisory opinion is that when states will regulate emissions, that will really cause them to look at private actors and how they can put influence on them, like the advertising sector. So next slide, please. So as Jonathan mentioned, we had this report that came out, and this was part of a multi-month effort from within the professional services community to really understand how their influence could be better leveraged. Not only to prevent harm and further emissions, but also really to spotlight their role in accelerating the clean and just energy transition, because a lot of times, PSPs are not doing harm. They're actually actively harnessing their experience, expertise, and knowledge from working with multiple clients in order to accelerate green energy transition. So really about acknowledging the role and the critical node that they play there. So we assembled this working group of different professional services providers, and we essentially created a set of best practices that have fallen under 6 action areas. And so they generally fall along, firstly, understanding your status quo, so mapping and understanding the services that you provide and where they connect to emissions. So really understanding how your portfolio is transition enabling versus transition blocking. Establishing governance, so having oversight and accountability mechanisms within your PSP in order to enact some of the guidance on service emissions. Integrating climate into due diligence, so having climate be a risk that as part of client intake forms in the same way that we screen for example, modern slavery or exposure to other types of risk. Leveraging your relationships with your client to kind of embed climate into briefs and discussions. Tracking your progress over time. So this is really about measuring your emissions, whether quantitatively or qualitatively, and really measuring their influence, measuring your influence through the governance mechanisms that you put in place in reducing your service emissions over time. And the final thing is really advocating for system-wide change, so making sure that it's a level playing field. And what we found in working on the service emissions work, which I'll speak to a little bit more in just a second, is that once people start ticking through this list, and there are sub actions under each of these, is that you realize you're already on the pitch, whether you like it or not. That so much of what you're already doing within your organization actually fits within these action areas. And we found with the firms that we're working with that by doing a mini audit of your organization against these 6 action areas, folks really find out they're doing a lot more than we think. And because the PSP sector is filled with highly qualified professionals who are extremely capable of rising to the occasion, it means that they're really meeting the moment for this higher accountability. Next slide, please. So as we see this surround sound of pressure and the widening accountability landscape, I want to emphasize that we are really trying to make sure that there is a low barrier to entry. To slightly belabor the pitch metaphor, it's not about having star players, it's about being on the pitch and making kicks, whether they score or not. You can tell that I'm not really, I don't know that much about football, but at Oxford Net Zero, we host something called the Service Submissions Hub, which is a research and engagement hub centralized at the university. And we have 3 areas of work. So the first is standards advocacy, so making sure that the standards that govern the net zero targets of major firms recognize this beyond operational impact, like the SBTI or the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which I'll speak to in just a second. The second and our most important area of work is our implementation working group. So having multiple different firms across advertising, the legal sector, marketing, consulting firms, and more, really working to implement those 6 action areas and advancing our shared understanding of what good practice looks like. So it's really a space for coordination, consolidation, and capacity building. And finally, we work with clients to engage them on creating that sort of demand side pressure for firms that are engaging with service emissions. And at the hub, our philosophy is really having multiple firms, multiple agencies, multiple law firms doing the implementation of service emissions imperfectly and really finding out what works along the way. Because our idea is that every attempt at implementing this quite new framework builds the collective muscle and our collective understanding of what good looks like. And it also really inspires others to step forward. I mean, in the panel that we'll turn to in just a minute, we've seen 3 agencies really putting their efforts towards the advertised emissions methodology, and it inspires other people to step forward. And we've seen that within the hub. We've seen lawyers get really inspired by what the advertisers are doing, the big advertisers getting inspired by what the smaller advertisers are doing, and so on. So it's a really exciting moment to basically see this momentum and see professional services providers really rising to the occasion. And just as a last point before I hand over to this brilliant panel so you can actually hear about implementation, is just to note that we're seeing this swell and the standards actually meet the moment as well. So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is the most widely used protocol for emissions accounting, is being updated for the first time in 20 years. And they have basically, if like me, you very closely follow their governance repository where they're publishing all of the updates on the standard development process. They are considering a new category 16 on service emissions. And just to note, the last time that a new category was added under Greenhouse Gas Protocol, it was for financed emissions. So we are seeing this kind of rise in widening the scope of emissions accounting. So we're seeing this proposal for category 16. And the Science Based Targets Initiative, which is the largest validator of corporate climate targets in the world, they are also in active revision mode. They have an ongoing public consultation open until December 8th. And we had a first round of consultations over the summer where we advocated for making it much clearer what they mean by goods and services in the document, because the SBTI refers to goods and services a lot. But when you went into the footnotes, it basically said services are, transport services to physically transport fossil fuel products. And so now in this new draft, we see a very explicit reference to professional services, to legal services, marketing services, advisory services that enable fossil fuel extraction. And the SBTI in this new draft requires revenue phase down targets for work provided to the fossil fuel sector. So we've really seen SBTI step up to the plate here, which is really exciting. And at Oxford Net Zero, we've done a very comprehensive, maybe overly comprehensive analysis on the document and where the survey questions most respond to areas that are relevant to the serviced emissions work. So if you scan that QR code, you can fill in a Google form, and we have briefing calls where we'll go over that written guidance and encourage you to submit a public consultation. So just as a last thing, I'll just, sorry, Jonathan, last slide. Just to say, I would love to have people join us at the Service Emissions Hub, whether you're interested in becoming part of an implementation working group or doing standards advocacy. We'd love to have you meet the moment with us and be a part of that surround sound of pressure and energy. Thanks so much.
Thanks, thanks, Alexis. And I just want to, just in particular, I just want to highlight the thing on the right here. And this is one of these very rare things in climate. It can be a bit sort of vague in terms of what the actions are you can take, but actually contributing to influence the SBTI to change the rules within the rule makers feels like a very high leverage intervention at a systems level. So we strongly encourage you to kind of like get involved in that. There'll be a follow-up email on that as well, but that feels like a very well spent hour when you join one of those calls. So thanks again, Alexis. Okay, so now we're going to move from guidelines to practice. And so I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel. So Lucy, Paul, and Jenny. I can't see Jenny is tagged, but I assume she is. Okay. Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences. Folks, these are three members of the Advertising Emissions Working Group. We'll come and talk a little bit about that at the end. But yeah, let's just start with introducing yourselves. And my first question to you, I'll start with Lucy here, is please tell us a bit about your organisation, its climate-related ambitions, and what personally motivates you to work on climate change in our industry. So Lucy, give us why you're doing this and what's your company all about around this.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. So I'm Lucy Usher, and I head up sustainability for Oliver. Oliver's an in-house marketing business, so it's not a traditional advertising agency. What does that mean? It means that we design, build, and run marketing ecosystems or teams for over 300 brands. We operate in over 40 countries. It's quite a big outfit. We're privately owned by the Brand Tech Group, who are the world's leading marketing technology group as well, which means that generative AI is part of our daily now. In terms of our business climate ambitions, this includes we've got approved science-based targets now. They were just approved this year. That was a big leap forward. We also try and show our clients how marketing can make more strategic, sustainable business transitions, which is actually a new billable workstream for us, so an opportunity. And we try to drive wider industry collaboration and change as well through such initiatives as the Advertised Emissions Working Group. It's been a really great place to do that. In terms of what motivates me personally, I was going to say I only began really exploring climate science about 7 years ago. Those 7 years have gone really fast. I was working full-time in advertising still in client services, and I was just starting to get involved in some climate education on the side. I wanted to really understand a bit more about it. That climate education moved from theory to reality when I was caught up, unfortunately, in the New Year's Eve bushfires in Australia in 2019, which were greatly exacerbated by climate change conditions. The fires and the smoke were so huge that they were seen from space. The death to the animal population and the damage to the land and the infrastructure was staggering. And after 2 sleepless nights evacuated by the Red Cross to relative safety, we did manage to drive home, but I drove home with ash in my hair. I had burnt eucalyptus leaves in my clothes, and the unmistakable feeling that we are out of time. Action felt like the only option after such a confronting experience like that, and so I moved as quickly as I could into sustainability and climate-related goals at work from there.
Thank you, Lucy. Yes, I've heard that story. You said that story before, but every time you say it, it's like, crikey. Yeah, to be there and see and feel the ash, it must have been a visceral experience. But thank you. Jenny.
Thank you. I'm Jenny. I work for an agency called Amplify. We are a global creative agency, I guess rooted in sort of more experience, culture, and entertainment. We achieved B Corp certification in 2023 across our offices globally, so in London, Paris, LA, New York, and Sydney. And we are lucky enough to work with some of the kind of world's biggest brands, everything from Google to Nike to PlayStation, often operating in quite a progressive space. I guess from our climate ambitions perspective, I think we've tried to really champion an evolution from sort of traditional sustainability to more conversations around responsibility. And I think it really reflects that for us, sustainability goes really beyond just environmental efforts that can often feel quite restrictive, quite abstract to some, and instead encompassing sort of more of a holistic approach across people and culture as well. As a business, we focus on trying to adopt considered conscious decision making to try and make those responsible decisions every day. We know we're not perfect, but how can we really question the little things, everything from kind of our governance structure to pitching to production, and then our client portfolio, which is where we sort of started to work more closely on the serviced emissions framework and advertised emissions. From a personal motivation perspective, I guess it kind of comes from knowing the power our industry has for storytelling, and I guess a bit of a frustration in why we're not using that for better and more positive achievements. I think the climate conversation itself is so often really polarizing for people, particularly in the world that we live in today. But actually really being able to use that creativity in much more of a practical, non-ideological way is something I feel quite passionate about, can really help build that momentum and ultimately shape a much more positive, thriving world in the future.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jenny. And Paul, it looks like you're outside broadcast from Brighton there.
I am indeed. That's sunny Brighton, always sunny in Brighton. Thanks, Jonathan. Happy to be here. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I work for a company called Ubiquity. We're a publicly listed global media consultancy, and we kind of offer media investment advice to 70 of the world's top 100 advertisers. The kind of services we provide is marketing mix modeling, contract compliance, agency selection management, and media cost commitment evaluation services. And we're kind of on a mission to help our clients, and as a result, the broader industry, achieve more effective and responsible advertising. In terms of our climate-related ambitions, so as a publicly listed company, we're actually legally obliged to submit climate-related financial disclosures in our annual reports, and we track and report our operational emissions in line with that current regulation. We are also in the process of setting independently verified targets through the Science Based Targets Initiative, which I'm very happy about. We're a global supporter of AdNet Zero, and we sit on the Global Steering Committee of that organisation. And last, but by no means least, I'm really very proud to have represented the company on the Advertised Emissions Working Group. We really want to be part of the change within the industry. What motivates me? Well, I've always felt that we needed to be doing a lot more to tackle what I see as being the inherent environmental damage and social inequalities that seem baked into our current economic system. But I think in the past, I kind of wrongly believed that change was only in the purview of political or non-profit organisations. So it's only really been in the last several years or so that my reading and research has taken me down a certain path that's allowed me to see that the links between the causes I believe in and the role that business can play in helping to solve some of those issues. And it was taking the Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership course in Sustainable Marketing, Media and Creative, where Jonathan is a tutor. And I found out more about the work of purpose disruptors. And it was that really brought this all together for me and allowed me to clearly see the agency that I have as an individual and the actions that I could take in my professional life to really make a difference. But it's really important to call out that it's not always an individual endeavour. What keeps me going now is sharing and collaborating with industry peers and really seeing the passion, efforts and success of others in the industry in making a real difference. So being part of a community of like-minded people has been really important. My own resilience in this work, and it's helped me to stay the course.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things coming up for me. We have a question that Purpose Disruptors is, what can I do from where I stand? And no matter what company you're in, and I think the three of you as representatives of large organizations, global organizations, is a demonstration that you can do this from within even places like that, not just the smaller companies that might be more mission led. And yeah, I think Jenny, one of your phrases is like, I don't want to do this alone. So having a sense of comradeship and camaraderie and learning that comes together, I think is really important. So thank you. Gosh, time is going fast, but let's crack on. So as you know, we frame this report around risk and opportunity. So why do you think that's important? Because yeah, why do you think that's important? Paul, let's start with you.
Oh, it is so important, Jonathan. I think that, you know, my personal journey is a reminder to me that we really need to meet people where they are. So, you know, not everybody is on the same path, and not everybody has come to the same conclusions on what needs to be done. And I think that's sometimes due to the previous framing or messaging about our industry impact. And I think that then that perhaps has failed to resonate or cut through. So, you know, we need to understand what motivates people to be able to engage with them and frame issues in language that they understand. And so for me, you know, that's why it's so important that the issues highlighted in this report are framed in a language of business risks and opportunities, because that really is the language of the C-suite. It's the language of boards and shareholders. You know, and in terms of risk, one of the things that I find really interesting is that horizon scanning. Now, you know, that's a key element of good enterprise risk management, and that's a method of assessing future threats and opportunities, which helps businesses to develop their medium to long-term strategies. So, you know, it's vitally important that climate risks of the business are considered as part of this process. And, you know, coupled with that is the fact that we shouldn't forget that CEOs of publicly listed companies have a fiduciary duty and legal obligation to act in the best interests of the company and its shareholders, to, you know, not only create but protect value, which means that they have to be aware of the impact that their decisions have on all of the stakeholders of the business. So for me, you know, by framing the approach to service emissions in the language of risk, hopefully these leaders should be able to see that a failure to acknowledge and address the current and future climate risks might be considered by some to be a failure in their fiduciary duties to protect the long-term viability of the businesses that they represent and lead. So, you know, this report really shows how leaders can adopt the framework to get on the front foot now, you know, not only to protect and enhance their business reputation, as Alexis called out, but, you know, benefit from the strategic advantage of being an early mover.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're super looking forward to engaging the investor community with this report as well to see how it resonates with them. Jenny.
Yeah, I guess to go on from Paul's point, I think for us it's helped move it out of a kind of moral conversation and more focused around business challenges, and again sort of meeting people where they're at, as Paul said, I think is so important for us in particular, and being able to have that conversation that offers a little bit more clarity in that, and you're not kind of going into it with a very emotional stance in some respects. I think the service emissions framework as a whole and the 6 action areas that Alexis took us through earlier really helped, for us anyway, validate some of the work we were already doing. And I think actually when you kind of go through it, and exactly as Alexis said, you're like, oh, actually, I feel quite good about this. I feel like we're doing quite a lot. And one of the areas that we had in place before, but the service emissions framework and sort of being part of the advertised emissions group has helped us develop, is our client screening tool that has really helped us have much more open, transparent conversations. It allows us to interrogate briefs through more of a social environmental lens when we get sort of new clients coming in, looking at using externally verified sources. So again, it's taking that emotion out of it, and it's actually being able to offer a bit more clarity in that space. And I think also interestingly for us, yes, the report and what we're sort of talking about is very much around risk, but it's also identified quite a lot of opportunity for us as well in that space, and being able to identify clients that actually we know really do align with our values a lot more. So it's it's easier for me internally to have those conversations. So it's not always a barrier, but actually, okay, this is a client that maybe we really want to grow and build as a relationship with. There's an extract of some of our resources in the report as well, and I'd be happy to share more information if that's of interest to anyone.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And there's a really great deep dive of Jenny's work at Amplify in the report, so please take a look at that. And Lucy, why is risk and opportunity important for Oliver for this report?
Yeah, for sure. So I really resonate with what Paul and Jenny have said. I started with quite a moral and emotional because of the reason that I threw myself into this work. And I really had to learn the language of the board, and suddenly progress really started pushing through in the business. So I, lived that experience. But framing all of this as a risk, particularly in a financial lens, it just really helps turn something that actually leadership, they often just underestimate it. You don't know what you don't know. Leadership can't be experts in everything. And often, they see headlines or snapshots about, climate risk to business, and it seems like quite a far away thing to them, particularly when they're normally concerned about the next quarter's numbers. So framing this as a risk through a financial lens, putting it in a language they can understand, making it quantifiable in a way that they can compare against their existing priorities, their existing risks. You've just made it so much easier for them to get their head around it and have a good conversation with you, but also with their inevitable stakeholders as well. So I think it just really helps highlight the scale of this risk. It's not a far off thing and it's not a small thing. And therefore, of course, the scale of the opportunity for those who do transform their business and make sure that they're towards the front.
Yeah, trying to make it an equivalent to AI, for example, I think is a key task for us. So we've got a couple of minutes away from the Q&A. So if you've got any questions, folks, please put them in the doc. And just before we move to that, I've got to ask you one last question. So can you give me one example each quickly of how engaging with service emissions areas or calculating advertised emissions has helped further your climate ambition within your organization? So just give me a quick example from each of you. I'll start with Lucy.
Yeah, sure. So measuring advertised emissions for our business for the first time, which was not perfect, but it gave us a quantifiable insight for leadership, was really helpful, because when I was given the time with leadership to explain the advertised emissions concept, I needed a full deck to explain, and I'm not as eloquent as Jonathan or as swift as Jonathan was at the start of this call. Getting time like that with leadership can be quite challenging. By just being, okay, what does this mean for them? I'm just going to measure it and just see what the outcome is, meant that I could go to them with one line. Our advertised emissions are 42 times higher than our operational emissions for the same year. Now, operational emissions are already largely understood by leadership, are something that is, quite tricky to reduce, actually. So that really put it in perspective. That helped highlight the importance of measuring risk and thinking about future desirable clients in our client portfolio. Like, let's actually understand who's in our portfolio and what that means for risk and opportunity. And it also then supported the move to have a formalized no fossil fuel clients policy at Oliver, with very clear definitions, a process behind it, and that we're now trying to move that up to a group level, which would then cover 12 companies as well. So wish us luck with that. But actually having that singular headline around advertised emissions measured just cleared up the conversation and sped the whole thing up.
Fantastic. I love, yeah, you get to the result many want to, but you can get there in the way that you've done. Thank you. Jenny, what's the one thing that has helped you?
I think for us, we are traditionally a brand experience agency, so we create physical events, and so our operational footprint is pretty significant and something that we as an agency know that we have to focus on to try and reduce. I think being part of advertised emissions has allowed us to sort of shift the conversation a little bit, to talk around our influence as well, and not just focus on things that, when we are activating projects globally, there's a lot of systemic change that's needed for us to actually reduce those. So actually being able to look at, okay, what's our influence, not just our footprint, has been enabled us to have much more interesting conversations, taking it out of a question of, is this a sustainability topic, more to, okay, how can we make more responsible decisions here? How can we actually continue to remain resilient? And I think similar to Lucy, we have a list of different industries that we won't work with, fossil fuels being one of those, and being able to have the data to back up why has been something that has just been super beneficial and able to have those really quick conversations with leadership.
Great, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, look, we're quite a way behind kind of the brilliant work that Lucy and Jenny are doing within their organisations, and I think that's maybe to do with the nature of the kind of business we are. We don't actually control advertising spend. We kind of consult on it. So it's been a bit of a challenge for us in terms of the measurement, but we have been able to use the other action areas of the framework to help us better understand what our impact is and what we could be doing better. And I think it's really important to understand that the advertised emissions methodology and framework is so much more than just measuring the advertising emissions. It's a way to start to evaluate our businesses, to understand where we are and the actions we need to take. So I can't stress that enough to everybody on the call. Just use the action areas to start making a bit of progress. And an example for us, we used Futera's client disclosure reporting methodology, and that proved to be a really practical starting point for us, because it's allowed us to map our client portfolio and identify the risk in our client base. And so much so that the leaders in our business now are now talking strategically about which clients and categories pose the greatest threats to our future revenues and which offer the greatest opportunities. So it really is an invaluable way of helping you understand what you're currently doing. I didn't realize how much we were doing in this space already, but also identifying gaps, so you can start putting together plans that are going to help you realize your own business ambitions in this space.
Brilliant, thank you. Again, it's just transparency, right? It's like, this is these are the companies we're working for, this is how much money we're making from them, these are the risks, what do we do? It's not rocket science, it's just a conversation about transparency. Thank you so much. So we went over time on the panel, but it's just so rich that it felt really worth hearing the nuances and the complexities of what you're doing. Amy, share us some questions.
Yes, right. Power 5 minutes of questions. So just to kick things off, I've got a few clarification questions. So Annalisa has asked, are we going to share the deck? I can answer that very quickly and say, yes, we will share a cut down PDF. We'll send that out in our post-event comms, so you can take those learnings and dig into it a bit more. Pam asked if Jenny can share the client screening tool. Yes, that's in the report as a lovely table, so dig into it. It's in the Amplify case study section. So question for Alexis and Jonathan. So there's been a few things around kind of like extending the service emissions framework, and one of the interesting comments is, have we considered measuring the emissions that advertising could remove from the world by implicitly communicating or showing better or more sustainable lifestyles? So yeah, sort of, we're obviously good at showing the kind of more negative impact, but can we show the positive influence that advertising can have? Alexis, you've raised your hand, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think working in climate makes you a bit glass half empty kind of person, but I do think that the power of the service emissions framework is that like it can go both ways, and that trying to identify what are the emissions that you enable, but also how does your involvement and the fact that you've worked with 5 clients before and you know how to do that quickly and accurately mean that a firm who's interested in diversifying into renewables can do that more quickly than they otherwise would have been able to do without your help. So I think one of the things that we want to consider at the hub is, how do we make sure that we have the flip side of it without giving the kind of carbon credit like thing where it's, okay, we worked with this one client on a renewable expansion, therefore don't ask us about our coal expansion work, because they kind of, or they equal each other out. So I think we're trying to identify a smart way to discuss those positive impacts without just leaving all the others on the table.
Yeah, I think also if you start doing your calculation this year, so what Lucy was saying, 42 times higher, so you've got a car client, and then now you're selling the EV rather than the diesel version, that number will go down. You need the baseline to understand where you are, and then the actions that you take help reduce that number. So you're actively taking it down until you can talk about the delta that you've saved as a consequence of the positive actions you've taken as a business to reduce your advertised emissions.
Great, thank you. Next question is for the panel, and Jonathan and Alexis, if you've got things to chip in here, please do, but more for the panel. There's a question on engaging the board. So I'm wondering what types of opportunities or language are resonating most particularly with C-suite, particularly those who aren't switched on really to serviced emissions? Have you got any wisdom for that question?
It really is calling out climate risk as something you need to get a handle on, because it creates an existential threat to the continuation of the business. For all the points that Jonathan and Alexis have called out at the top of the call and in the report itself, and that resonates. When the C-suite and boards start to see that there is a risk to long-term business viability, they start to sit up and listen. They have to.
Great, thank you. Lucy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I can add to that and say, agree with Paul. And also sometimes you don't have to go straight to the exec board with the risk thing. Like in our business, for example, there's a compliance team who have a risk register. Most big businesses have to have one. Had a conversation with them, got environmental and climate related risks put into the risk register, which automatically goes into an exec board meeting every quarter because they have to. So there are sometimes other existing systems that you can leverage. So it's not just your voice trying to get through, but also risk, yes, opportunity. Exec boards love to hear about potential new work revenue streams, even if it's, pilot this year, scale it to 5 clients next year, scale it beyond after that. So, there are ways of helping the business understand that there's actually proper payable business related to influencing and supporting marketers within brands to transition their own marketing strategies towards a more sustainable way of doing things. Quite a lot of really big brands out there already have sustainability somehow kind of embedded in their business plans. The marketing team do not have a clue how to actually action that. So there's an opportunity side as well. Thanks.
I'm conscious of time. We have 1 minute left. I don't know if we want to. There were so many brilliant questions, but I'm conscious that, yeah, we're sort of honouring the hour. So, Jonathan, I don't know if you want to wrap there.
Yeah, so what we'll do, I think we can do kind of wrap the do the questions, and we can maybe pull out some of the key ones, and we can put that into the email that'll get sent out as well. We will do that. So what a rich conversation we've got. Should we do this for 90 minutes or should we do it for 60? We did it for 60. It might have been the wrong call. Anyway, thank you so much everybody for coming and joining this. We were really impressed and surprised by the volume of people that wanted to hear about this. So really grateful. And as we've all said, this does feel like the climate risk as an opportunity and a lens that has arrived to be able to accelerate things beyond just operational emissions and really see the business in a new way and be able to, as a whole company approach, to tackle climate and use our skills to help drive beyond unsustainable consumption to kind of creating a new economy. So thank you so much, everybody. I also just want to call out Nadine Ayashi at Purpose Disruptors, who just was amazing at leading on the writing of the report. So thank you so much, Nadine, and the panel as well, and everybody at PD supporting me through quite a difficult time. So thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesdays and weekend. Happy Christmas or festive period when it arrives. So yeah, all the very best, and have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be sending out 3 ways in which you can get involved with the work.
Well, yeah.
As a follow-up, so there'll be a shout out if you want to join the advertised emissions working group. We're particularly interested in hearing from brands, and actually also particularly interested in hearing from social media, digital platforms. So if you know anyone who could add contribution to that, please get in touch. Jonathan at purposedisruptors.org. And we will also be sharing around another link to the report. So if you have not read the report, there's lots in there. I'll drop in the link here, because I know that some of you haven't, because there were more people that signed up to the webinar than had downloaded the report. So I'm just going to drop that into the chat. And yes, thank you so much, everyone. Cheers.